Oh, welcome to Soundtrack, a live queer oral history project sponsored by the UBC Equity and Inclusion Office. I'm your host, Michael V. Smith, coming to you from the beautiful unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. Each week, we welcome a special guest and feature a new album as the prompt for the soundtrack of our lives. Today, we have an album that makes you want to move, or I should say makes me want to move. It's Survivor by Destiny's Child from 2001. And to tell us where they were when is writer and U of T prof S.J. Sindhu. Hi, Sindhu. Welcome to
Hello.
Soundtrack.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yay, I'm so glad you're here. This is a thrill.
Yeah.
So I'm going to flip the queer toonie. Do you want queens, whoops, or bears?
I'll do bears.
Where did my toonie go? Oh, okay, bears. I got bears. You go first.
Okay, awesome. All right. Okay, I had all of this set up and then my computer crapped out. So I have to open it back up again.
I can go first. Yeah, let me go first because I lost my I lost my queer toonie. So I don't mind going first. We'll let you get set up. Okay, so this is Survivor, because I always call it the same as the title of the album, Survivor. This is the hardest of the soundtracks to write because I'm so old. I've forgotten 2001 nearly entirely. What was I doing? I'll let you in on a little secret. More than the year or my age, these albums help locate me in a place and time, which is tricky with Survivor because, despite being a homo, I came to Beyonce late, which can tell you something of my musical tastes and reveals possibly a snobby aversion back then for anything I considered too mainstream. I know all the songs, I told my husband, but I don't remember where I was anytime I've heard them. And my hubby replied, well, let's start by listening to the album over dinner. Not 5 minutes later, a dance party rolled up through my body, spinning my pelvis round and wiggling down along my arms, despite our food going cold on our plates. I shouted to him with the liquid bend and slide of my limbs, the poem writes itself, moving through my body. Survivor opened up all this body memory, how I shook it on the dance floors at the turn of the millennium. Wow, my limbs used to move like this. But the when and where were still elusive. Then I realized in 2001, I had turned 30. So you know who might know? Kim. He and I have long been sharing birthday celebrations because we're born 10 days apart. Kim also happens to like queer history more than most. He remembers things. He's invested in remembering. He still teases me about the first time we met at 25 when I interviewed him for an article I wrote in my MFA about he and the other volunteers who worked at YouthCo, an AIDS organization run by youth for youth. Kim was so handsome after hours alone with me on the staff couch, I had trouble concentrating like never before. So I tried to listen and take notes by focusing just on the page in my lap. Okay, so I texted Kim to ask, did I party with you on our 30th? He replied with the whole anecdote, of course. Yes, I was to meet with friends at the Lava Lounge, but they closed down that night forever. So I put a sign on the door directing folks to the Odyssey instead. Brian showed up. Maybe he suggested the Odyssey because he knew you were there with a couple girlfriends celebrating your birthday. So we celebrated together. None of my other friends showed up. I was secretly devastated and swore off big birthday bashes for fear of a repeat. I don't remember that night was our 30th, but I do recall leaning in to shout on the dance floor to make a pact to do this every year. That was 20 years ago. I bet we danced to Survivor or Bootylicious or Dangerously in Love that night. Who needs to remember when you have friends like him? He's a second, much more retentive brain. This past year, he's been working on his archives, trying to beat a ticking clock we call terminal cancer, multiple myeloma in the blood, which is reductive, like his shrinking capacity, what he can eat, how long he has to nap each day to recover from simply digesting food, the good hours of the day trying to outdo the rest. He's always talked about queer legacy, how important it is to keep a record of our lives, because history hasn't been kind to history that is queer. Kim is likely the reason why I'm doing an oral history project. And because he had a camera or knew someone who did at whichever gig, every gig, all the time, I'm everywhere in his archives. Last time I visited, he pulled out photos and videos of us in our 30s that I'd never seen. Visiting the California Redwoods, an afternoon on a yacht once owned by Judy Garland, a whole whack of gigs, go-go dancing for his queer punk band, road tripping the Pacific coast from LA to Vancouver, the Homo Go-Go Festival in Olympia, partying with Pansy Division, whose guitarist swooped in and carried away the cute guy I'd flirted with for an hour, whom I still resent, both of them. Kim is what I call a door opener. He's always making things happen for himself and for other people, and then keeping track too, making and keeping time. That first afternoon when I met him on the Youth Co couch, nothing happened. But later that year, I was volunteering for Out on Screens Film Festival when some Adonis with green hair said hi to me by name. My first thought was, I don't know this guy. People this gorgeous don't talk to me. Michael, he said, it's Kim from the interview. It took a few years for me to tell him why I didn't recognize him that day. But 25 years later, he still teases me how I forgot who he was. Likely, maybe, possibly, to hear my refrain that he was too pretty to remember. I had to forget him if I wanted to be happy, which all the irony in the world will tell you is a better line when you're young. Ooh. Well, Sindhu, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. Okay. Mine is a lot more serious than yours, but I'm just gonna launch into it. And I also called it Survivor. As a child, I survived the Sri Lankan Civil War. I suffered from malnutrition due to the Sri Lankan government's food import restrictions into the city of Jaffna, where I lived with my grandparents. My parents, veterinarians who worked on farms, lived in dangerous, contested areas prone to frequent fighting. In Jaffna, we had to worry about bombings from the Sri Lankan army. Every once in a while, we'd have to flee our home when the battle lines drew too close. But somehow, due to privilege and pure, mad luck, I survived. Later, I survived as a brown person in the hate crime-ridden aftermath of 9/11, and then as a brown queer person living in the American prairies. And then again in the push and pull battle between my family, who wanted to marry me off in an arranged marriage, and the art-focused, child-free queer life I wanted to live. So there were a lot of things that drew me and still draw me to Destiny's Child Survivor album. As new poor immigrants, buying albums or books was out of the question in my family. Survivor was a gift, the first album I ever owned. But it wasn't until I was a young adult that I really fell in love with it. I had just come out as queer and was facing being disowned by my family. Both the songs Independent Woman and Survivor gave me a way to imagine a self-sustaining life free from the cage into which my family wanted to shove me. Surviving physical danger is often purely a matter of privilege and luck. I didn't survive the war because I was smart or disciplined. I survived because I got lucky. But to me, emotional survival and the grit that we earn as a result is a matter of hard work as well as luck. I survived as a queer brown person in a society that hates us, embedded in an immigrant culture that hates us, embedded in a family that links queerness with deep shame. At the same time, I worked as a queer rights activist, which was largely thankless and uncelebrated. I worked 2 jobs to pay for my apartment and food. I was a full-time student with dreams of entering academia. I was also dating and falling in love and getting my heart broken. When things got to be too much, as they often did, When my anxiety and PTSD from the war and the stress of too much work and not enough sleep and my inherited depression threatened to sink me, I would take long drives at night. I'd blast Survivor through my speakers, turned up so loud that the lyrics crowded out all the negative thoughts spiraling in my brain. The album is more than just feminist power and lyrics. It's music to dance to, music to scream to, music that's empowering on the level of beat and rhythm. Survivor, and the first two songs in particular, reminds me that emotional survival is hard work, but work worth doing, and that we have to earn every inch of our own peace. The album reminds me that I will survive and I will keep on surviving.
That's gorgeous. So beautiful.
Thank you.
And, yeah, and really heavy.
Yeah, it is very heavy. It's so heavy.
It's one of the things that I love about music is how you can have all of this joy in the body, right? All of this, like, it asks you to move. It asks you to celebrate. It asks you to prove that you're alive while it's giving information that is so heavy. Can you talk to me a little bit about sort of the queerness of survival?
I think queerness is survival. I think survival is queerness. It's, we were in, especially, in the last 100, 200, 300 years, we weren't meant to survive in this culture in this global culture that we've built due to colonization and due to the spread of Christianity and other religions that are anti-queer. We aren't meant to survive. And so if we do, and when we cling to that survival, I think it is the most queer act that we can perform.
I can't remember who it is. I wish I could remember this. I bet you Kim knows. But there's I remember somebody saying that the best way to beat all of the isms, homophobia, colonialism, all of that our prosperity and our joy and our celebration is an act of resistance. Like just waking up and being happy to smell the air is an act of resistance. And that every queer person who comes out, it's a hero story. Mm-hmm. That every queer person who admits to at least themselves is on a hero's journey. Mm-hmm. Does that ring true for you?
So true. I think that's so true. And maybe it's because I haven't, had a supportive family, or I haven't, had the easiest time, but I do think it's true. And I think it's true for pretty much everyone. I think it's changing though. I think that queerness, especially in contemporary Western cultures, has sort of divorced itself from this idea of survival, because, now that we have marriage equality, now that we have anti-discrimination protection, there is something that I observe in young queer people that is unfamiliar to me. And I think that's a sense of security. It's a sense of not having to survive. And I still see it in young trans people, and I see it in young non-binary people, but I don't see it in young gays and lesbians who come from like middle-class white families
in big cities.
I'm not seeing that anymore. And I'm seeing some sort of self-security, which I don't recognize. It doesn't feel familiar to me. And I don't know what that means for the future of queer culture.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I wanted to do in this project is let me say this. What's been very surprising in doing this project is the degree to which I feel like I've evolved, like I'm surviving less. And I've forgotten the ways in which being 19 or 20 and skinny and very effeminate, how vulnerable I was in the world in, 1990. Canada was a very different place. People could call you nasty things on the street and no one would stick up for you. Mm-hmm. And they do, and they do now. Like, I got harassed in the Costco a few years ago, and everyone around, and I called the person out for harassing me, and everyone around me was on my team and was very obviously on my team. Like, they were letting me know, that was great, good for you, I'm so glad you did that. But they wouldn't have done that in 1990. It was a very different world. And so making this show has been interesting because it's giving me access to a different, it's reminding me of the kind of person I had to be in order to get to where I am now. And I don't want to lose that, because I think that the terror I had as a queer person in the world is really important to remember. If not, I don't want to live in that subject position if I don't need to, because then I can be more productive not living there. But I don't want to lose it, which is why writing and recording and keeping track and archiving and, do you feel that? Do you feel like writing's sort of a way of keeping that history alive for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to document what this felt like to be in danger, both physically and emotionally, all the time, from society in general. And I think queer culture and what keeps us together is so bound up with that idea of danger, that I don't know what would happen if we lost it. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have peaceful lives or that we shouldn't grow up in relative security about being accepted. I just mean that I feel like a lot of young queer people don't know our history and don't know how recent that history is. And thus are infighting and sort of policing boundaries of identity in a way that's really harmful, bullying each other. I'm seeing all of this happen online, and I'm talking, we're both university professors. We're seeing young people, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, go through what it is like to be queer. And it's almost like the policing from inside the community is worse than the policing from outside. And that terrifies me.
Yeah, I'm always trying to get things right. And I want to lead with generosity. Mm-hmm. Like, I want to get things right because you want to respect people. You want to meet them on their terms. You want to make sure that you recognize who they are and how they want to be acknowledged in the world. And sometimes you make mistakes. I misread, but I'm always trying to make sure that it's a generous space, that I'm sharing my privileges as widely as I can, being that kind of door opener like Kim was for me. How do I open doors for other people? How do I give them more permission, more space to make mistakes too, not just to always get it right, but to be human, which is flawed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's harder when you're young and you've got things, you feel like you're fighting so hard for space. Maybe that makes us a little more militant. And when I'm older and I have more comfort and more space, I can afford to be more generous and make more room. But I certainly noticed that edge, right? Trying to get things right, be generous, make space. And some of that militancy also opens doors, right? It also does move culture forward. You need to be angry with your mother for, saying the homophobic thing so that she doesn't say it around you, and maybe that helps. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, there's a certain, it's not all bad now, right? Like, there's a lot of acceptance that young queer community has that I've always fought for like acceptance of bisexuals and pansexuals, acceptance of non-binary people that don't look androgynous, because when I was young, I was coming out as non-binary, you had to look the part in order to be recognized, and otherwise people were like, you don't really look that way, so you're not. And I spent a lot of time presenting in a way that didn't feel authentic to me because I wanted to be recognized for being genderqueer. And I think that has changed too, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, that gives me a lot of, I'm really struggling with that, actually. It's amazing that you say that. That's so true. I know that with like, it's a big problem with, you know, women bisexuals, that they don't read properly, you know, properly. And so then are you really bisexual because you're in a relationship with a man, and how can you possibly, there's all that ridiculous stereotyping stigma. Mm-hmm. It's thrilling to see how much more permission we have. We really have gained a lot of permission. We've gained a lot of room to not be as legible, which in some ways it sounds weird to say, but is such a real gain that it doesn't matter as much. We are listening to what people, how they identify, rather than reading and imposing a belief on the thing we read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard people call it the new queer taxonomy, where we have all these like a lot more identities than we used to have, and each identity is valid and everyone's allowed to self-identify, but at the same time there is policing going on, you know, like it's like both things. It's good. You know, bringing it back to the Survivor album, like there's some really great stuff. There's a lot of like super feminist stuff in there, but then there's like a couple of songs that are questionable that we probably wouldn't accept today. You know, talking about, you know, basically slut shaming other women, and
nasty. Nasty is nasty.
Nasty is nasty. I really cannot wrap my head around that song anymore. And I can't wrap my head around the version of myself that accepted that song either.
Yeah.
And it's a complicated relationship, which I think I also have with the new queer taxonomies.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm going to go research queer taxonomies. Amazingly, that's a very generous 20 minutes. We're over our limit. Yeah. So it brings us to our time for this week. I want to thank you for joining us, Sindhu.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. It forced me to think about things that I hadn't thought about in a long time.
Well, this is the longest conversation we've had, just the two of us. That's one of the thrills of the show. Okay, so let's all give Sindhu a warm thank you of applause. If you haven't already, check out our Facebook event page or the Soundtrack group for more info on Sindhu, and buy their books, write them fan mail, invite them to read in your town and teach their work in your classes. And check out the Facebook page for 3 book launches coming up for Blue Skin Gods, Sindhu's new book. I want to, here's my magic. I love this. Look at that. Pew! I want to thank the UBC Equity and Inclusion Office and the Faculty of Creative and Critical Studies for financially supporting this event, and the Inspired Word Cafe for helping get the word out. We will see you next week. There's 2 episodes left. Bye, everyone. Mwah.